Welcome to another episode of LinkedIn Live, where our show is Grace Under Pressure. One of my guests today is Pamay Bassey. It's those of you who've watched the show know that it's about grace under pressure. We talk about the stuff that's very often dismissed, the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, and the commitment. Grace for me is the generosity we show, respect we demonstrate, and compassion we show for others. And when you do it as a leader, it means acting for the benefit of all and energizing the organization. And it's my pleasure today to introduce Pamay Bassey, who is the Chief Learning and Diversity Officer for Kraft Heinz Foods. Welcome.
Thank you so much, John. It's great to be here.
Great. I want to tell folks a little bit about you. You're with Kraft Heinz, and you are all about inclusive and continuous learning. You're strategic, and you create initiatives that help people learn more effectively. You have got deep expertise in learning theories, including AI, which I know you did an undergraduate degree in at Stanford. Really cool. So you are also the Chief Experience Officer for my 52 Weeks of Worship, which we're going to talk about. And prior to Kraft Heinz, you served as the Global Head of Learning and Professional Development for BlackRock. Again, way cool. You're a chair of the advisory role of the Haas Center for Public Service at Stanford, and many other things. And your family and you are active in your parents' home country of Nigeria. And you earned your BS in symbolic systems from Stanford, with an AI intelligence concentration, an MS in computer science. And here's the cool part, folks. She is a graduate of Second City Conservatory in Chicago. Welcome, Pamay. So,
thank you so much. I do try to keep it interesting, John. Mix it up a little bit.
You do. You're actually our second guest. Dr. David Fessel was on earlier. He's a Second City grad too. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
We need more improvisers in the world, more comedians in the world.
I love it. Pamay, the world's been turned upside down. You are working virtually and you're teaching learning. Tell us about the challenges you're facing as a CLO part of your role.
Sure. I think one of the things is we're all facing challenges. It's been a very challenging year, and it's taken a lot of energy just to kind of navigate the twists and turns and all of the uncertainty and really just kind of stay, at equilibrium as we try to determine what was going to be around the next corner. At Kraft Heinz, I had the benefit of having a digital platform. So we have a corporate university called Universality. We had, before this happened, already started working on evolving that platform. And so it was great because once everybody kind of went home and we had to say, how are we going to deliver training and learning? We had that as a foundation and had evolved that. But I think everybody was just trying to figure out, well, some people had more time, some people had less time. There were programs that we had planned that were face-to-face programs where people would co-locate and have cohort-based experiences. And very early, myself and my team made the call to just translate all of those into fully virtual experiences. So it was kind of a masterclass in looking at the information in front of you, making the next best right decision, and giving people the opportunity to learn and grow in this kind of uncertain environment.
Great. And question, I'll ask it, and we don't really know the answers. Do you expect the virtual learning to continue? So
I do, actually. And I come from tech. So my foundation, it was in ed tech. I believe that you can have really engaging, innovative and relevant learning that is infused with technology. I think myself and my colleagues are going to be asking the questions going forward, which programs that we translated into a virtual experience should stay virtual, and which ones really do need to be face-to-face or blended. And so really taking the learning that we have gotten from the past year and taking that forward to say, we really don't need to meet for this course, but we absolutely need to gather this particular group of people to learn this thing in a specific space.
Right. Since you do have a background in AI, is there a role for AI in virtual learning? And
I think absolutely, because first of all, one of the things that kills any learning experience, especially if it's technology, digital, is just, I'm bored, it's not relevant, it's either too much or too little, I'm too advanced, or it's too simple. And the thing that you can do with the data that you have from the choices that learners are making is really creating more personalized learning experiences, whether that be the kind of the Netflix style, hey, you've chosen these courses, maybe you want these, or really in the flow of a simulation or something like that to say, wow, John made a pretty expert call here. Let me send him down this path that's a little more challenging. Oh, Pamay needs a little bit of help. Let me see if she could go through this path where she's got a little bit more scaffolding. And so I think there's room for technology to help in those two scenarios and more.
Great. And I'm going to flip it again. Since you work in human development, you are a member of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches. What role, what's it like to teach virtual leadership virtually?
Well, a leader has to be agile. A leader has to be able to assess whatever situation they're in and deliver. And so we were all in this situation, right? And so, as an improviser, one of the lessons that I learned is you play the scene you're in, not the one that you want to be in. So if you're an improviser, I don't know if you've been to a show and you ask for a suggestion and someone gives you a suggestion, you move with that suggestion. You don't negotiate with the audience like, hey, I don't like that suggestion, give me another one. Yeah. And similarly, we are all in this COVID era. We have to deliver virtually. Leaders, managers needed to be equipped to deal with the current situation. And so I'm just glad and very blessed to have a team that, we just dove in and said, how can we make the best of this? And beyond that, how can we use this virtual environment to make certain things about our programs even better? To, captive audiences, breakout sessions, whatever interactivity that we could embed in our learning experiences that you can't do in the same way.
And now you not only have that's the CLO is only one part of your title. You are now the Diversity and Inclusion Officer. So what a year. So we've had many conversations with colleagues about the tragedies of this year, George Floyd and so many other things, it's an inflection point. It's on top of mind. How do we sustain change? How do we make it real? So,
I'd like to say, being the Chief Learning and Diversity Officer is a perfect combination of two of my passions, right? So I am, learning is my superpower. I think you can learn your way through anything. When we talk about diversity, you're really talking about representation, taking a really hard look around and saying, is my organization, my community, my, insert place I am analyzing really representative in a way that I want it to be? But it's also a learning choice. And, there's a quote that I love: diversity is a fact. It's happening in the world. Whether or not you choose to, acknowledge it or not, it's a diverse world. People have different experiences, different walks of life, but inclusion is a choice.
Yes.
It requires you to humbly determine, what can I learn about people who have different lived experiences than myself? How can I, as a leader or manager, make choices to make sure that people feel belonging, that I'm bringing in different perspectives across the table? And so it is a constant intentional focus on creating an inclusive environment and teaching every member of the community to choose to be inclusive and to choose to learn and to choose to engage.
That's great. We've been, quote, having classes in diversity forever. Do we teach inclusion? And if so, how?
Absolutely. I think anything that you want to get better at, you have to learn. You have to commit to learning. And so, if you are a manager and you realize you have a very diverse or geographically dispersed organization, then what are the tools that you can use in order to make sure that you're intentionally creating an inclusive environment? So I think you teach inclusion just like you teach anything else.
Great. Okay. And part of that, and I've written about this, and with my calling myself out, is part of the learning to lead with inclusion or be inclusive is to recognize one's own biases. Is it not? So.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a never ending situation. I've been working in this field for a very long time, and still it's an active, when you're trying to make a decision, saying, hey, what's actually influencing this decision? And how am I mitigating that? How am I interrupting that bias? How am I encouraging my peers to do it in a way that's constructive as opposed to destructive? If I say, John, come on, that's crazy, that's probably not going to help. But if I can pull you aside, or if I can use specific shared language to say, there's probably a less biased way we can go about this,
Well,
that
that's
takes
great,
also
Pamay, and
practice.
thank you for
Yeah,
your candor because, quote, you're the expert in this, certainly at Kraft Heinz, and I know you wouldn't call yourself that, but I will. And even it's a topic that you wrestle with, which is part of our humanity,
I agree.
and that's what we need to wrestle. Now, you have something. Learning is very personal to you. You said it,
Yeah.
so you created something called 365 things I'd learned from 365 days of learning. Tell us about that. So.
Sure. I love projects. And I have learned over the span of my personal and professional career to tackle big things in small pieces. Any learning around creating a habit, I'm there for it. And so I decided in pretty early in my time at Kraft Heinz to make a professional decision to learn something new every day for a year and share it with the organization through our internal social media app. And, I started last February, 2019. I was just a few weeks in and really modeling as a leader, a learning leader, what it looks like to be a lifelong learner, what it looks like to make a commitment to learning. And it was life-changing, and it served as the foundation of the learning transformation.
Something you refer to, and you may have said it, but what is a personal learning style, and how does it help? Tell it what it is for you and what it might be for others.
I think everyone likes to learn a different way. I mean, I love to read, always have. But even this year, where we've been using so much of our eyes, spending so much time staring at screens, I'm like, maybe a podcast, maybe I'll use my ears. I think everyone knows, do you like podcasts? Do you like to read articles? Do you like e-learning? Would you rather be in a face-to-face situation, and really determining what your style is, so that when you're in a situation where you need to take in information really effectively, you already know where to go, what your trusted source of learning is, what the trusted format is, so you don't have to kind of make that up as you go along when you're in a situation where you need to learn something quickly.
That's great, because when you were saying that, I was flashing on your idea about teaching leadership, and we're doing it virtually because obviously leadership, there is personal leadership, but leadership is other directed. So doing it virtually is a challenge, is it not? So.
I think it's all a challenge. Learning is challenging. I think it's not something, if you're learning something you don't already know, then it requires commitment and requires you to make a choice to stay in it. And when things are uncomfortable, to push through. I can share something with you, John. Here's a framework you might want to use for a difficult conversation. You still have to take it into the world and try it. Succeed, fail, reflect, determine what you want to keep, determine what didn't work so well. And so it is that continual kind of commitment.
I like your attitude toward it. It's it sounds so laissez-faire, but it's backed by structure. So try it and see how it works for you. And I think that's so important when we're dealing with topics like leadership or diversity, inclusion, all of that. Is it not? So.
Absolutely. Because you're going to learn, you're going to succeed, you're going to learn, you're going to fail. You got to kind of just stay in it and realize that it's just the cycle of learning.
I want to pull back just a tiny bit here. We are in an era of fake news, and that's reinforced because people have their own choices of media and what they do. So does that present a challenge for you in education, be it face-to-face or learning or virtual? So.
I think, when you're trying to determine your trusted sources of learning, for me, it's less about stumbling upon something that's just fake and more about, if I'm trying to manage my time, for example, there's so many different approaches, so many methodologies, so many frameworks. Pick one that works for you, and then that becomes your trusted source. If I need to find a place that I know I can go to get quality information, so if I need just an infusion of ideas, let me go there. So it's more of kind of navigating the enormous world of information and determining these are the places I know I can go to get great inspiration, great information. And so it streamlines my process.
Okay. Something that you talk about is make learning specific. So give us an example of that, Pamay.
Yeah, I've spent the last 2 years talking about creating a learning habit, making time for learning, taking ownership, making a commitment. For me, it was every day for a year. The first year, this past year, it was just 100 learning experiences in 2020. But once you have that habit, you can apply it to something specific. I actually spent some time yesterday as I'm thinking towards 2021 saying, here are 7 topics I want to focus my learning on for 2021. Because I have the habit. Now, what specific skills or capabilities do I want to develop? What information do I want to become more expert at? And so I think the first thing is establishing the habit, and then learn anything according to your commitment. And then how do you apply that to a specific?
Because I'm kind of slow on the uptake here. How does one develop a learning habit? And is it universal or unique to each of us? So
I think you make that commitment. So when I said, I'm going to learn something new every day for 365 days, that was for me. It was 5 minutes sometimes it was an hour. The habit came when I realized, wow, I every day for a year have learned something new and shared it. I think so it doesn't have to be every day, because that's a lot. Some of my, my colleagues have said one thing a week or one thing a month. Like, what is the regular cadence where you're going to seek out new information and engage with it? And that, in making that commitment and keeping it, is you creating a learning habit.
And you said something, you added something to that. You learned something and then you shared it. Does the sharing reinforce the learning?
So important, because there's learning, you take it in, you reflect on it, and then you share. I do a lot of writing, and in the sharing, first, you're creating a culture of generosity. Here's something you might think is cool, John. I've read it, I've processed it, I'm sharing it. But it also helps you to reflect upon what you want to keep, what you want to try, and what, didn't work so well for you. So you're absolutely right. The sharing is super important.
That's great. You took that 52 weeks again to a different topic. And that's 52 weeks of worship, which is very personal. And I want to read a quote from it and then ask about the book, which I think is fabulous, but then ask you some specific things about 52 weeks of worship is a clever and unusual look at one woman's journey to regain her spirituality. Pamay Bassey has done what most people could never even imagine, spending one day a week in a different house of worship. I'm going to stop right there. So that took a lot of work, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was life-changing. And frankly, my 52 weeks of worship happened a decade before my 365 days of learning. And so really that's one reason why I thought, hey, a year-long project could be useful when I was in this new role. That first year of my 52 weeks of worship came after a very personally challenging year. And so that commitment was made because I just wanted to see goodness in as many contexts as possible. And so I walked into places of worship and respectfully observed how people interacted with each other, with their faith community, with their, framework for how they dealt with life's joys and challenges. And it was, I learned an enormous amount. And I will say it has served as a foundation for my inclusion practice, because sometimes you walk into a space and you're like, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but I'm going to respectfully engage. And sometimes you walk into a place and it feels like home. And so it was really a great year, and has been the gift that keeps on giving for the past decade that I've been engaging.
You partook in faiths different from your own. Am I correct in it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wildly different in some situations. I look at pictures from that time, and there was some documentation of I'm not obviously part of this community, but people were very welcoming, and I learned an enormous amount.
Now, I want to pick out some key words from this review or quote, and which is so elegant. The effort that Pamay exerted taught her the universality of community. Mm-hmm. What's that mean? So, in
a lot of ways, when I say, I had 52 things I learned from 52 weeks of worship, that family is the first congregation. And so really, I was walking into people's homes. I was seeing how people congregated as families and as communities. And that is just a human approach to this life, is to say, who around me can help to support me and challenge me as I grow as a human, whether it be spiritually, professionally, personally. And so everyone is always seeking community. And I saw that in so many different configurations.
That's great. And there's another concept, the joy of sharing. And what does it mean, the joy? Because that's a particular subject that I enjoy exploring. So
In trying to determine how to find goodness after a difficult year, it was lovely to see the different ways that people sought joy. I mean, I went to a service and there was apparently someone getting married and they invited the whole congregation to come. And I'm looking around like, but you don't even know me. And so, and I've been in situations where I've been invited into people's homes and they knew this was the first time I'd ever been to their place of worship, but it's time for dinner. We're making dinner. You want to take a plate? Yeah. And so there's in that sharing of whoever comes into my space, it's a joy to share with you. I saw it over and over again, and it really helped to lift my spirit.
I love that definition because they're talking. It's generative, and we often talk about happiness, which is important. But I always like to say happiness is an ice cream sundae. We like it, but it's transitory. Joy is sustainable, is it not? So.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes joy is what you need to experience because life is challenging, and to experience joy gives you kind of hope to say, okay, well, it exists. I can keep going.
And another concept related to this and something inherent in grace, my acronym is respect. What did you learn about respect?
So much. I mean, and like we talked about, but creating an inclusive workplace, to be able to speak about worship respectfully was a masterclass in inclusion, because I was sometimes in situations where I thought, well, this is not for me, but it's for all these people around me. Like, this is what's grounding them in the world. So as I tell their story, I have to be respectful and choosing words and really being able to say, well, this is what I saw. This is what resonated with me. This is what didn't resonate with me, but it did for all these other people. Literally a masterclass in figuring out how to be respectful as you engage with people who are different than you. And everybody deserves respect because we're all trying to figure this out, Right. So that's what I experienced.
It's so often, and switching back to the corporate world for a minute, it's so easy to get sideways from a boss or something. That's why when a new boss comes in, some people have new opportunities, but it's that discipline of looking at people with an open heart. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, is it not? So,
yeah, I mean, in the diversity and inclusion space, we often talk about assuming positive intent.
Yeah.
And sometimes that positive intent, it turns out, well, maybe that wasn't so good. But starting saying, you know what, John, I'm assuming that he's engaging with me, he intends to do that respectfully, and practicing that. It's all about practice, because you walk into every new situation. You assume positive intent, you try to be respectful, and then you see how it plays out. And that is relevant and useful, whether you're in a place of worship or you're in a corporate office or you're in your home or your community or wherever you are.
So I love how you said that. It's practice, practice, practice.
Absolutely. It literally is commitment to practice.
Yeah. And that's good. And within practice, there's I'll say, an expectation, or at least an understanding that there might be slip-ups. Is there not? So.
There has to be, because, and that's when people say, be comfortable being uncomfortable. Get in there, give it a shot. And, you speak so much about grace. Give it when you need to give it, and expect it when you need to expect it, because there will be slip-ups. And then hopefully what you'll experience is people saying, okay, well, here's where you slipped up. Don't do it again. I'm going to extend you some grace.
Well, I need that. I know that. Anyway, there's one final thought in this. It is, I liked it. It jumped out at me. You experience the pride of people who are committed to their faith, to their religion. How did that manifest itself, Pamay?
Constantly. I was walking into celebrations. I was walking into congregations where it was clear that traditions were being passed from parents to children. You felt it. You felt that this is our community. This is what we believe. And frankly, as a stranger and a visitor, we're so excited to share this with you. I went to a place in Wisconsin, and I could have stayed there all day, because they said, people don't stop by here, and here you are. And we're just so excited that you're here. We want to share our community with you. So, and I think that is actually also another thing to note. Whenever you're dealing with people from different lived experiences, people have memories, they have experiences, they bring certain things to the table. And sometimes they're really proud of those things. And to allow people to share the things that make them who they are with you, you can learn, you can be blessed, you can your eyes can be opened and your mind can be challenged if you just walk into a situation with an open heart and let people share with you.
That's a good thought. And in faith, in practice, there's dignity, is there not? So
yeah, absolutely. Especially because, sometimes people use their faith when they're dealing with things that are challenging, right?
sure.
I went to a couple of services where people were remembering people who passed away, which was relevant for me because my father had just passed away.
Yeah.
And the dignity in using your belief structure to deal with the things about life that are really hard was a privilege to be in that space.
And that's what I like your concept of the journey of work, 52 weeks of worship, is that it is inherent in it is the word I used, journey. It's an exploration. And do you think you came out in a different way? Were you somewhat of a different person when you began as when you came out the other end 52 weeks later? So.
Sure. I mean, I wasn't on a shopping expedition, so I wasn't looking for a new way of worship. I walked in with, I worship within a specific framework, and I'm still that person, but I just was so enriched by every experience I had, challenged, asked myself, hey, so how can you have a functional, intentional practice based on all that you've learned? So, it's, again, like I say, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And I continue to learn from it every day.
Oh, that's great. Now we're going to shift because I ask every guest who comes on here a question of grace. Do you have an example of grace that you'd like to share with us, Pamay? So.
Sure. I mean, just to kind of build upon our conversation about my 52 weeks, I really experienced the kindness of strangers repeatedly. And I'm a comedian, so certainly anytime I walked into a situation and it was clear I didn't know what I was doing and I was going left when everybody was going right, there was always someone who said, okay, I see that she's new here. And we would make eye contact and they would extend me something, some sort of, information or guidance. And that was really grace. And I learned through that process, the kindness of strangers is real. And sometimes even more of a blessing than the people who know you and love you. And so whenever you walk into a situation, whether it's a new role at a company or a new community or a new challenge, there's always someone who's a helper. And that I've experienced that grace from that helper in so many different contexts. And so I love the idea of grace because I've been extended grace so often in my life.
Oh, that's wonderful. As you were talking about helping, there's a famous quote of Fred Rogers. And what he talked about, he said, when I was a little boy and when I would see things that were bad, my mother taught me, said, always look for the helpers because they'll make it better. And what a wonderful, wonderful thought. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's something that helps. I mean, look at the year that we've had. There have always been people who are like, how can I focus on making this better for people who are suffering or struggling? How can we keep food on the tables?
Yeah.
And so it's a wonderful thing to know that there's always helpers. And you just need to look.
There are, and that's you're reinforcing this idea of grace because it's grace that facilitates that ability to connect with others, especially different from ourselves. And also in challenging times, grace, as the title of the show, is grace under pressure, which is a lot of us, you in a leadership position, there's a lot of pressure on you, but I know from knowing you and people who know you, you exhibit grace, my friend. You keep that equanimity about you, but you are out there and you are a helper. So
it's very kind because when you talk about practice, I think leaders you can say that about. I mean, I look at leaders in my life, they're obviously practicing being graceful, especially when there's a scarcity of information. Like, I don't know all the things, but let me see if I can lead in this uncertainty. And so it's very kind of you to say, I'm surrounded by a lot of role models that have taught me to be that way.
Pamay, how can people find you? I know you're on LinkedIn and other places. So is that the best place, or do you have a website that you want to share? So,
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. My52wow.com, my 52wow.com is also a good place to find me.
Great. Well, I will put that in the notes. And Pamay, you have been a wonderful guest, and thank you for sharing your story with us and lessons. And I wish you much success.
Thanks so much, John, for having me.